Before we begin, if you're interested in understanding how money, power, and history shape the world we live in, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I break down complex financial systems in a way that actually makes sense, without the noise. Now let's talk about something that sounds impossible at first. Almost every country on earth is in debt. Trillions of dollars are owed, with governments borrowing year after year. But if everyone owes money, who is actually lending it? Imagine a world where every single country owes more money than it actually has. The United States owes trillions. Japan owes its share. And even small nations like Greece or Argentina are buried in debt. But here's the twist. If every country is in debt, then who exactly is the creditor? Who is lending money to a nation that already owes money? And who is actually profiting from this endless cycle? At first glance, it seems like a paradox, almost like the world is playing a giant game of financial musical chairs. Some countries owe each other, some owe international banks, and some owe institutions like the IMF or World Bank, creating a web of money that's complex but fascinating. In the next few minutes, we'll unravel this tangle of global debt, break down who really holds the power in lending, why countries borrow from each other, and what this means for the global economy. By the end, you'll not only understand how this massive system functions, but also see how it affects everyone from governments to ordinary citizens. We'll explore surprising examples, show how nations fund each other, and reveal the hidden flows of money that keep the world running even when it seems like everyone is perpetually in debt. When we talk about national debt, we're really talking about a government borrowing money to fund its spending beyond what it collects in taxes. Every country, whether it's a global powerhouse like the United States or a smaller economy like Portugal, borrows money to pay for things like infrastructure, healthcare, defense, or to stabilize the economy during crises. Governments borrow primarily by issuing bonds. A bond is basically an IOUN. A government issues a bond. It promises to pay back the amount borrowed plus interest after a certain period. For example, the US issues treasury bonds, which investors around the world buy. Japan, China, and even private investors purchase these bonds as a way to make a safe return on their money. If governments keep issuing bonds and taking loans, doesn't that just increase debt indefinitely? The answer is yes. But in reality, debt is not just a number, it's a financial tool. Governments often roll over debt, meaning when one bond matures, they issue another to pay it off. This keeps the cycle going, but it also means borrowing is not necessarily a sign of failure. It's a method to fund projects without immediately raising taxes. Debt can be classified into two types: domestic and foreign. Domestic debt is money owed to lenders within the same country, like local banks, pension funds, or citizens buying government bonds. Foreign debt is money owed to creditors outside the country, including other nations, international institutions, and private investors. The distinction matters because foreign debt can create dependencies on other countries, while domestic debt circulates money within the national economy. Central banks play a huge role as well. They manage a country's money supply, control interest rates, and often act as lenders of last resort. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments borrowed massive amounts of money, and central banks purchased large portions of these bonds to keep the system stable. Private investors, hedge funds, banks, and pension funds also buy government bonds, essentially lending money for a return. Debt is not just about one government owing another. It's a web of lenders and borrowers with multiple layers. While debt can sound scary, a well-managed system can actually fuel growth. Countries with strong economies and good credit ratings can borrow at low interest rates, invest that money, and theoretically pay it back through increased economic activity, mismanagement, excessive borrowing, or global shocks. However, can turn this system dangerous. Understanding global debt is about seeing it as a complex ecosystem of bonds, loans, and financial instruments. Money flows from countries, banks, and investors to governments and back again in a continuous cycle. It's not a simple case of someone owing someone else. It's a structured network designed to fund economies and maintain global financial stability. National debt is not simply one country borrowing from another. Creditors are a mix of nations, financial institutions, and private investors, who all have stakes in the world's economy. Major economies like Japan and China are often the largest holders of U.S. debt. They buy treasury bonds because they are considered safe investments, and holding U.S. debt gives them leverage in global finance. Exempli, China's purchase of U.S. Treasury bonds stores foreign currency reserves while keeping the U.S. economy stable, which benefits their exports. Europe is another example. Countries within the EU lend to each other through bonds, loans, and shared institutions. This interdependence creates stability, but problems in one country can ripple across borders. International institutions like the IMF and World Bank also act as creditors, providing loans to countries in crises or for development. They charge interest and set conditions that influence domestic policies. Private sector actors, banks, hedge funds, pension funds, and insurance companies also buy government bonds as investments. Even ordinary citizens participate indirectly through pension funds or mutual funds that invest in government bonds. Creditors can also be debtors, as countries lend while simultaneously borrowing, creating a complex network of obligations. Japan can hold U.S. debt while the U.S. owes other nations. This mutual lending keeps money circulating but creates hidden dependencies. Visualize a network where each country has arrows pointing to all its creditors, other countries, institutions, and private investors. Ultimately, creditors are anyone willing to provide capital for interest and security. Some are motivated purely by profit, some by strategic influence, and some by global trade stability. Understanding creditors shows that debt is both a financial tool and a mechanism for influence, keeping economies interconnected. Without these creditors, governments couldn't borrow at scale, and the modern economic system would look very different. Creditors provide liquidity but also hold power over debtor nations, creating tension during crises. Countries borrow from each other for multiple reasons, combining economics with politics. First, borrowing allows governments to fund projects without raising taxes immediately. Infrastructure, healthcare, education, defense, and social programs all require enormous funding. Borrowing spreads the cost over time and allows governments to invest in growth. Economic crises are another major driver. During recessions, pandemics, or natural disasters, tax revenue drops while spending needs increase. Governments borrow to stabilize the economy, provide safety nets, or stimulate recovery. For example, during COVID-19, almost every developed nation issued new debt to support healthcare and businesses. Political and strategic reasons are also critical. Lending between countries can strengthen alliances, create influence, and secure long-term partnerships. For instance, U.S. loans to developing nations often come with expectations of political alignment or trade benefits. China's Belt and Road Initiative involves lending to countries for infrastructure projects, strengthening its global influence. Borrowing also helps manage currency and trade dynamics. Countries with trade surpluses lend to countries with deficits, maintaining balance in international trade and supporting global economic stability. But borrowing is not without risk. Debt growing faster than a country's ability to repay can spiral into a crisis. Countries must manage interest payments, maintain investor confidence, and ensure borrowed money leads to growth. Greece during the Eurozone crisis shows excessive borrowing combined with weak growth can require bailouts and strict austerity measures. Borrowing is more than financial. It has social, political, and global implications. It is a tool for survival, growth, and influence, enabling governments to fund services, stabilize economies, and engage in international trade. Without borrowing, the modern global economy would be far less interesting. It is a balancing act between immediate needs and long-term stability. Debt is useful but comes with serious risks. Sovereign debt crises happen when countries cannot meet obligations, leading to instability and social unrest. When a nation defaults, it can't borrow easily in the future, and its currency often falls, causing inflation and reduced purchasing power. Global financial contagion is another risk, as crises in one nation can ripple worldwide. The 2008 financial crisis in the US affected Europe, Asia, and emerging economies. Investors lost confidence, banks restricted lending, and the global economy slowed dramatically. High debt also increases vulnerability to external pressures. Creditors can demand policy changes, influence spending, or enforce austerity, creating power imbalances. Debt affects economic inequality. Wealthier nations and large institutions benefit from interest payments, while developing nations struggle to fund services. Countries like Argentina and Venezuela have experienced cycles of borrowing, default, and restructuring, limiting long-term growth and perpetuating poverty. Even stable countries face risks from excessive debt. Rising interest rates increase payments, which can crowd out spending on public services. Mismanagement, corruption, or global shocks can turn manageable debt into a crisis. Political instability is another implication. Public backlash against austerity or high taxes can lead to protests or government changes. Debt also influences diplomacy and international relations. Countries holding significant portions of another nation's debt gain leverage in negotiations, trade deals, or military alliances. Debt is a double-edged sword. It enables investment and growth, but can destabilize countries, regions, and even the global economy. Policymakers must balance borrowing with responsible fiscal management and maintain credibility with creditors. Citizens are affected through inflation, taxes, or reduced public services. Debt is not just a burden. It creates profit and influence for creditors. Other governments and institutions holding debt receive interest payments over time. For example, the US pays billions in interest annually to countries like Japan and China for treasury bonds. This interest is a steady, low-risk return, making government debt attractive. Private investors also profit. Banks, hedge funds, insurance companies, and pension funds buy government bonds, expecting predictable returns. Some take on riskier debt from smaller nations with higher interest rates, aiming for greater profit. Debt is also a tool of influence. Lending gives creditors leverage over debtor nations. Conditions attached to loans can include economic reforms, trade concessions, or political alignment. Institutions like the IMF influence domestic policies in borrowing countries. Debt fuels growth for creditors because money constantly moves through the financial system. Interest payments, new bond issuances, and refinancing create ongoing opportunities for profit. In a sense, debt redistributes wealth from debtor nations to creditors. Responsible borrowing can lead to infrastructure development, economic stability, and productivity. This benefits both debtor and creditor. Debt is both a funding tool and a mechanism for global wealth distribution. Even when countries struggle financially, money circulates and profits are made, sometimes in surprising ways. Wealthier nations may accept low returns for stability, while riskier loans yield high profits for creditors but high risk for borrowers. Profits come not just from interest, but from influence, economic leverage, and shaping global finance. Ultimately, creditors benefit whether countries thrive or merely roll over loans. Debt is a system where lenders extract value, shape economies, and sometimes influence politics, keeping the global financial system moving. After exploring the complex web of global debt, it becomes clear that borrowing is more than just numbers on a balance sheet. A system that keeps the world economy moving, even when it seems like everyone owes everyone else. This network of borrowing and lending keeps money flowing. Every country borrows for different reasons, whether to fund essential services, invest in infrastructure, stabilize their economy, or strengthen international influence. The creditors, ranging from other countries to international institutions and private investors, don't just provide capital, they also gain power, profit, and leverage over the nations they lend to. This system creates a delicate balance. It fuels growth, redistributes wealth, and enables global trade. But it also carries risks like defaults, political pressures, and economic inequality. Debt is not inherently bad. It's a tool. Like any tool, its impact depends on how it's used, managed, and repaid. So the next time you hear that a country owes trillions, remember that behind those numbers is a network of relationships, influence, and financial strategy that shapes the world. The real takeaway is that in the global economy, debt connects us all whether we realize it or not. Understanding who owes what and to whom helps us see not just the numbers, but the power dynamics and opportunities behind them. In the end, if every country is in debt, the question isn't just who the creditors or writs, how this system shapes the world we live in and the economic forces that touch all of us. If this video helped you see global debt in a different way, hit the like button so more people can discover it. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into financial history, global power shifts, and the hidden systems that run the world. And tell me in the comments, do you think global debt makes the system stronger or more fragile? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.